is Sharon Fitzpatrick with Presentation Expert, and joining me is Bethany Auck from SlideRabbit. And we had so much fun on our webinar that we couldn't even get to all the questions. So I thought it might be fun to spend some time doing the questions. So here's a couple. In Winnipeg, Canada, this person works with clients that need help slimming their presentations. So they're asking, what do I cut or not cut? What kind of slide diet do they need? How do I get them started, especially drinking the Kool-Aid?
Yeah, so I guess that's really two questions, right? How do we get a hesitant client on board? And then what kind of slide diets? So I'll just answer those separately. Convincing a hesitant client is all about just showing them that this really is best practice in the industry, and there's just endless amounts of information, free resources and some paid resources that you can do that with. A lot of companies, us included, Sharon included, we keep blogs on the subject where, we often touch on the importance of simplifying content. So those blogs are out there for you. The Presentation Expert webinars are, of course, on YouTube, and a lot of other speakers, TED Talk type people, do a lot of presentation thinking on YouTube. Those are all worth looking up. If you're looking for something a little bit more in depth for a true skeptic, I really love Dr. Carmen Simon's books. She was at the Presentation Summit last year, and I was just blown away. She talks about a lot of cognitive science and the intersection of that and presentation. And for a true skeptic, that might be what they need to get on board. I really recommend her work. So the other part of that question was, what kind of slide diet? That's so content dependent. That really comes, you're gonna have to look at the content and say, where are my clients' weaknesses? Are they wordy? Are they redundant? Are they just jamming everything onto one slide? And start there. Start with portion control, separating those things out. If you've got a client who's they're not gonna let you change it, that's what's gonna happen, and you're not gonna be able to trim anything down. The rest of the slide diet approaches can all work together to make more visually appealing and powerful slides by using some of those other tricks. So the display tricks, icons, diagrams, that sort of stuff is going to help even heavy, hefty content feel more digestible for an audience.
I think you're so right. I think also too, it's hard because I think people think they have to put everything on a slide and it should be 2-point type, and you're going to have the audience spending more time trying to read what you wrote instead of really looking at the content and figuring out how do they get the value out of the content.
Yeah, it's all about making sure that those value points, those main points, are front and center on your slide, whatever that means, top billing. So that's how we kind of start with the slide diet approaches to kind of come to those slides that are going to be more powerful.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, it's so hard. I mean, I just came from a webinar about software-defined networking, and sometimes the diagrams they put on there and the tech speak, you need a dictionary to go with it. But for that audience, maybe that does work. And so you got to really understand your audience depending on what it is.
It's so true.
There's a great, there's a company, Infodiagrams. I don't know if you've seen them. They do some really interesting things about infographics. I'm going to definitely edit this out. Infographics that are really done by industry, and I think that's another guide, is to look online and see what an industry trend is. What are they looking for? And they have some really nice ones for pharmaceutical, which I think tends to be very text heavy sometimes, as well as financial and agriculture and some others that I think are worth looking at.
Those are super. I've never seen those. I'm going to look those up because, especially since we work in all different industries, they do have different needs. And then that's part of the difficult part when people, especially like some of these questions, people are like, well, what's the exact rule? And sometimes there just isn't an exact rule. And it's all about kind of figuring out the usage of your slides, the audience knowledge, and then kind of coming to a conclusion about what's the right approach. And sometimes that kind of subjective decision-making doesn't feel very comfortable for people when they're developing a presentation.
One thing I found, I have a client who insists on having the small type, insists on keeping everything up there, and a slide diet, they're going more for gorging on facts and pictures, and you have to really figure out what it is. But I finally gave up, and what I did is I added a question, a survey question about the slides and whether or not they were too text heavy, too visual, what did they really want? And it wasn't until we could show them the survey results that they got it. And sometimes it's just hearing it from other people.
Yeah, I completely agree. And especially with a hesitant client, I feel like the people who tend to be the most hesitant are at the top of the organization. And so you get a lot of people who are pushing upwards to make change, and that just often can be just a world of frustration. And so if you can get a focus group going like that, that's the way to do it, because that's just, that's just irrefutable evidence.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also third party, so it's not just you telling them. The client may not always be right, but it's important to try. Any tips and pointers for translations? We have one of our subscribers who takes their English language slides and translate them into 24 languages. Yeah. And often the icons don't translate. And some of the words too. I mean, the words you have to be really careful with as well.
Yeah. Translations are really difficult. We actually just did a project that was almost exactly, I think it was actually 24 languages also. So maybe same client. But I think what's difficult there is that things become really culturally relational that you don't even realize, especially, if you're like me and you work, from your home office and you're not traveling the world. There's a lot of things that are culturally subjective that we don't often identify as culturally subjective. Icons is a great example. Like if we're talking about food, I might use a fork and knife. Well, in a lot of parts of the world, that's not what people eat with, or that's not something that they have in their home on a regular basis. Then we're just kind of sending the message to the audience that like, this content isn't really for you. We wrote it for someone else and we translated it to your language, and here it is. So if you want to really keep your audience engaged, you have to spend the time to switch out things like icons and imagery. For icons, you can just kind of reduce the number you might use and keep them very broad. You might be able to use them across all 24 languages. Images is a lot harder. I think you need to be looking to make sure that your images reflect to your audience their experience. So like people and like places and situations are all things that you need to be conscious of. Even like forestry, like the trees that you're seeing in the imagery, it can be important if people can easily identify that this was created in North America and I'm here in Japan and this doesn't look like my world at all. It's going to be obvious. So using a little bit extra resource there to kind of spend the time to make everything relational to each audience is important.
I did a branding project for a Fortune 500 company that had to be translated into multiple languages, and the product was information, and it was information from all sorts of industries. So we used iconography, things that were pretty commonplace, like chemical or legal, or things that we really were able to say would be worldwide, like the justice, the Lady Justice, or, something along that line. And that really helped a lot. Medicine was another one.
Yeah, this is such a good point. So that was like, the other thing is that math is the same language everywhere.
Right.
So if you have numbers that you can talk about, whether it's graphs or statistics or, graphic displays of numbers, that sort of thing, that communicates in all languages. So if you're looking to add visual and you've got numbers, that's a great place to start. I think with icons, just going back in time is helpful too. So like if we can think of just like the earliest iteration of whatever the concept is, sometimes that is more globally relational than like what we think of as whatever it is now.
I also, if somebody's going to translate it into multiple languages, one of the things I tell them is start a list of words that might be problems. So, For example, in North America, we use the word tools for everything.
Yes.
It means not a nice thing when you go overseas or different things. So you need to make sure that it's also appropriate for whatever country you're going to be translating into.
Yeah, I mean, resources allowing, I think you need to have a native speaker be reviewing in every language that's critical, because there's so many nuances in culture and language and slang that can really hurt your piece if you're not careful.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've all been in that situation. So it seems that slides are still really wordy. The audience will read while the speaker is talking. What parameters should we follow on how brief the words on the slide should be?
This is one of those rules, I think, where people really want a hard and fast limit. And again, this is a usage thing like we talked about earlier, where it's really, you have to think about what's your audience knowledge level, what's your speaker's comfortability level, what's the goal of the slides. If you've got an aspirational or motivational deck, you may be able to get away with 0 words in your entire presentation. But if you've got something that's highly technical, it's unlikely that that's going to be logistically possible for slides that are going to communicate effectively. So it's all about kind of figuring out what the end goals are and what the end usages are, and then that should give you some guidance. You'll hear like people on the internet, there's a lot of like 6 bullets per slide and then 6 words per bullet. Well, that's still too much text for me, and in that situation I wouldn't want them in bullets anyways. But it really depends on what's the usage of that deck. If that's a motivational deck with 36 words on each slide, that's just send them an email. But if it's a technical deck, you might need those words. All words are not created equal either. So it's all about figuring out what text is speaker notes and extraneous stuff that I can pull off so that the content pull off my slides, so that the content can really stand out more. Mm-hmm. And then don't worry so much about words that are aiding understanding. So if you've got a big banner title that's really telling everyone what the main point of the slide is, or what the main point of the data that you're displaying is, like, that's great. Don't worry about those words. Worry about the words that are going to be redundant to what the speaker's saying. I
also think you could use the build or animation to also bring in words so that you're building up the momentum and they're not concentrating thinking, what do those 6 bullets mean? If you do it one at a time and then you tell the story as you do each one, I think that's another way to really look at it as well.
Absolutely. Like, just even if you want, you can use it all in one slide, build this on, gray it back, build this on, gray it back, and then they're all there at the end. Separate them onto 6 different slides and use a push animation so that things look like they're sliding through. There's a lot of ways to deal with content where you really feel like you need a little bit more wordiness.
Yeah, and I think then you're really focused on the content and not on what is that word again. So I think it's a great way to do it. So any recommendations for a mandatory template background, like dark or textured backgrounds?
So mandatory backgrounds are a challenge. I think nine times out of 10 when you're working with a mandatory background, you probably also have a mandatory palette. That really sometimes will kind of guide where you need to go. If you have a little bit more freedom or you're picking within the palette, just look for things that are high contrast. That's the name of the game in almost any presentation, especially if it's going to be projected. You want contrast. For loud backgrounds, whether it's a bright color or texture with a bunch of lines and circles or whatever it is going on back there, you want your content then to be thick enough, whether it's the kind of the size of the lettering or the size of the icons or the lines or whatever you've got on there, to be thick enough that that color is creating enough of a visual space that it's kind of popping off of that background rather than kind of bleeding into it and adding to that busyness.
And that makes total sense. I think sometimes you've got also really ones that are really busy, and even learning how to work within that, whether you put, a semi-transparent box on it so it stands out and the background then becomes a little less obvious. I mean, there's some different ways, that you can do that. So I thought we'd have some fun. One is, I thought we'd talk about the low-tech solution we came up for your webinar. So let me kind of tell everyone what happened. We did a dry run and the morning of the webinar, and we kept having problems with the sound. It sounded like she was in a tunnel. So we sort of put our heads together and we came up with a low-tech solution. And why don't you tell them, because you were so brilliant in making it work.
It's in use once again today. I have, my office is relatively new. It's actually not that new, but I just keep making myself feel better that I have not furnished it at all. So there are very few soft surfaces. And so we went, and I can see if you can see that. We just put blankets on the ground and then behind pillows behind my various office elements to cut down on those firm surfaces. I had heard that helps with noise, and it, believe it or not, it actually does. So like half my bedding is in my office right now, just trying to cut down on that noise.
I definitely think it works, and I thought we had a lot of fun with it, and I really appreciate how much fun you were in trying to figure it out and then letting us do something with it. So any tips and tricks you'd want to share with people?
No, I mean, I think the thing that came out of that webinar the most, or at least as far as questions go, was really color usage. And we didn't talk about it much in slide diets, and color is so important. I think the reason I didn't even try to tackle it is because I think you could probably do like 3 webinars on it. I did, so beyond like what we talked about here in contrast, I did post another blog post this morning on color, just like a little primer, which might be helpful for people. It just talks about how to pick colors and color and attention and that sort of thing. So, and provides links to some other resources. And I felt like that was the one kind of area of question that maybe didn't get answered as much as people kind of needed it to.
So is that on Visual Sugar or part of SlideRabbit? Okay.
Yeah, so it's on SlideRabbit.com, and then if you click Visual Sugar at the top, it's the first post. And if you just scroll down our main website, you should be able to find it there too.
Terrific. We'll have our readers go in that direction. Bethany, I want to thank you. I had so much fun doing this webinar with you, and I really appreciate you willing to follow up because we had so many questions we couldn't answer them all. So thank you so much, and I'll hopefully see you in Vegas.
Sounds great. I'll see you there.
Okay, bye.
Bye.